Welcome to Table Talk. What a blessing to be with you, those joining us online, and all of these wonderful people here around the table and spread throughout the congregation or throughout the sanctuary. So we're continuing in our study of the essential scriptures, and we've passed through the key stories of Abraham. And then we entered into Isaac, and then, of course, his sons Jacob and Esau, and we're picking up on we're going to continue talking about Jacob tonight. But let's start off with a little bit of a recap. What did we learn last week about Jacob and Esau? What were their main characters? What were the main topics? What was the main events? I'm gonna put something down. I'm gonna do like spin the bottle and see who answers.
Jacob means supplanter, liar, deceiver, and that's what he was. And Esau, red, hairy. He succumbs to the desires of his flesh, and that's what he did. And he married the two Hittite women, and they grieved Rebecca and Rachel.
Okay, excellent. Jen, you were going to say something?
He stole his birthright.
Connived him out of it, didn't he?
Yeah.
All right. And not just the birthright, but something else as well, right?
That's
The blessing, the Abrahamic blessing. So he got them both. You were going to say something? Yes, you were.
I have a lot that I want to add, but I don't want to jump in.
Okay. So you were going to say everything that they said so wonderfully, so well that you can't add to it.
I was gonna add, but
I
like
guess
in between
not.
where we're at, yeah, no, we're good.
No, go ahead.
So something I noticed as going through the story is that and I thought about was the deceiving continues, right? So he goes in and he lives. Jacob will go and live with Laban, and he'll be kind of tricked into marrying Leah, and he'll have Rachel, but he'll end up working for Laban for a long time, and he's kind of deceived that way. But people who generally lie a whole lot get caught in can't seem to find a way out of their lies, right? They can't seem to find a way to get out of their lies. They're constantly trying to make a way, and oftentimes through deceiving, and they just continue to deceive and continue to deceive. Something I read ahead of this that I thought was really good was I never noticed before is even in it's a lack of trust, really. It's a lack of trust in God. It's a lack of trust in people. It becomes a lack of trusting other people to do for you. Even when he experiences what they refer to as Jacob's ladder, at the end of chapter 28, he says, well, God, if you take care of me, if you look after me, if you do these things for me, and you bring me back to my family, then I'll follow you and you'll be my God. So he kind of, even with his approach to God, it's kind of like this a lack of trust, and I'm not really gonna fully trust in and follow unless I get something. And that's really been his attitude up to this point with the blessing, with the birthright. It's like he really wants something out of it, and it's all about what can he get. And that continues to be his attitude until what we talked about tonight.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And it's one that we can bring into a practical discussion of what's happening in Jacob's life and apply it to our own, because these are learned behaviors. So the family has a problem with lying, first of all. Abraham lies repeatedly when he's faced with issues that he doesn't feel like he can overcome. But remember, God promised him, but he's not turning to God. Isaac does the same thing, and he lies in similar situations. And then you have Jacob, who is, he's named deceiver. But where did they learn this? It's a so he's seeing this pattern, and not just lying. They also have a generational habit of favoritism. Abraham favored Ishmael until God said, no, it's Isaac. Isaac favored Esau, and God said, no, it's Jacob. Jacob will favor Benjamin and Joseph, and God says, no, it's Judah. So there is this continuing behavior, this dysfunction that's happening in the family. So when you look at Jacob, he's lying all the time, probably because he doesn't know who he can trust. That's all he's ever seen. And so he's telling God, if you'll do that, you got to prove yourself to me, because all I've ever been is lied to. And I think we all know people, and some people here and watching online can probably relate to that. You've dealt with that before. And as you rightly said, a lot of times, people who tell lies, they just get deeper and deeper and deeper trying to cover the lies. And there's an old adage, the best way to, if you're worried about covering a previous lie, the easiest way to make sure you don't cross yourself is to always tell the truth. That takes out that problem, right? But that also minimizes the experience that we see in Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and beyond. So as we look at that, that's something for us to consider. We're not at a really stellar testimony yet, if you think about it. Esau succumbs to the desires of his flesh, and Jacob lies to get what he wants. Not exactly stellar examples, right? Yeah. But God's able to work with it. So, any other thoughts on that before we look at how God turns this thing around? And you're right that Jacob ends up for 7 years working for what he thinks is Rachel's hand in marriage, but he ends up getting tricked with Leah, and then he's got to work another 7 years for Rachel. And we talked about that Sunday when we were looking at Psalm 18, and David said, according to my righteousness, let it be done to me. And we talked about reaping and sowing. What goes around comes around. Well, it comes back to bite Jacob. But the difference is, a lot of times in the Psalms, you'll see people like David who will be like, oh, okay, yeah, I did this, and now it's back on me. Jacob doesn't get that yet. He's still, that's the way the world is, and God's going to have to wrestle that out of him. So any other thoughts before I read that? Everybody good? Well, let's look at Genesis 32 real quick, and please update me if anybody's throwing in things online. But in Genesis 32, we're going to pick up reading in verse 24. And the word says, then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. Now, when you see that, it doesn't actually say man. It says, and it's not even angel. It is a heavenly figure that he's not. He knows it's not of this world, but he doesn't know who it is at the time. When the heavenly figure saw that he had not prevailed against him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, and the socket of Jacob's hip was dislocated while he wrestled with him. Then he said, this being the heavenly entity, let me go, for the dawn is breaking. But Jacob said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. So we're back to that point. You see that continuity. So the heavenly being said to him, what is your name? And he said, Jacob. Then he said, your name shall no longer be Jacob, but Israel. For you have contended with God and with men and have prevailed. And Jacob asked him and said, please tell me your name. But he said, why is it that you ask my name? And he blessed him there. So Jacob named the place Peniel, which means face of God. For he said, I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been spared. Now the sun rose upon him as he crossed over to Penuel, and he was limping on his hip. Therefore, to this day, the sons of Israel do not eat the tendon of the hip, which is the socket of the hip, because he touched Jacob's hip and the tendon of the hip. Okay. What jumps out at you from that passage? They don't. That's what it's saying, that they don't eat the tendon where the hip is joined out of reverence and recognition. And there's a symbolic meaning to that. But let's get to that toward the end because that's kind of the culmination of everything.
So one of the things that jumps out to me is Jacob's persistence to not let go until he was blessed.
Okay, you gonna say something?
So one thing before that I thought was interesting because we've been reading the Experiencing God book, and one of the parts of Experiencing God is God initiates, and then God speaks, and then you come to a faith crisis before you're walking in the will of God. And that faith crisis, you have to make a decision on what you want to do, right? You have to say, okay, am I going to follow what you're doing or not? In verse 9, it talks about Jacob's in a tough situation. He's coming from Laban, who's pretty mad because he's left with his. Now they've made a covenant before he left, right? But he's pretty mad because he's taken his daughters and really all the possessions that he has, right? They've been left with not very much left. And now he's going towards Esau. And he's got to face his past. He's got to come back to it. And
Who he anticipates is trying to kill him.
right, who is in all means that has wanted to kill him for 20 years. And then Jacob, it says, then Jacob said, God, and he begins to call him out, God, Father, my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac, the Lord who said to me, go back to your land and to your family, and I will cause you to prosper. He begins to cry out to God, and he says, please rest, in verse 11, it says, please rescue me from my brother Esau, for I'm afraid. Otherwise, he may come and attack me and my mothers and their children. So he's coming to this place of like more desperation. Like, God, I need you. I'm in a tough spot. I'm in between two places. And I think that it's interesting that God shows up and wrestles with him. And I think oftentimes when we come to that spot with God, now we have to wrestle with our faith.
Mm-hmm.
Am I gonna change? Am I gonna change my walk? Is my life gonna change? Or am I gonna continue to do it my way? Right? And he's made an attempt to do it his way by sending people ahead of him. And when he sends people ahead of him, that's when God encounters him alone at nighttime. He's trying to set the situation up, but he's like, okay, that's when God comes and encounters him when he's alone and by himself. And he's like, okay, now I have to contend with God. So I thought that was an interesting.
So when Jacob's alone and Jacob is trying to lay hold of God, God actually lays hold of Jacob. Anybody ever experience that? Where you're crying out to God and you're like, oh God, I need you in this situation. And God says, well, let me wrestle something else out of you because this is how you got in this situation in the first place. Anybody ever experience that?
Yeah.
Few of you? Yeah.
I call it a guilt complex.
Yeah. A conviction complex, we'll call it. Yeah, but he grabs a hold of you and he says, well, how did you get here? You know, what's going? It seems like God is coming against Jacob. Maybe even that God is his enemy or his adversary. But that's not what's happening at all. Notice that, first of all, going back to Patrick's point, God touches his hip. Now, God could have touched him anywhere. But we know that symbology is very important in Scripture. Why do you think he basically knocks his hip out of socket? And Jacob never fully recovers from this. Why? You know, I know some of you, when Nikita Koloff comes here in March, you might be like afraid if he's going to grab you and knock your hip out of socket or something like that. But, you know, God's not doing, he's not trying to get the heavyweight championship off you. There's a reason he does this to Jacob. Why do you think that is? Think of it symbolically.
To slow you down so you'll think.
So you're slowed down, right? Now, if you're wrestling, what are your hips?
Weight bearing.
Yeah,
They're everything. That's your pillar, right? Your legs are standing. So you're not on firm footing anymore. And still, God could have healed him right there, but he doesn't. How is this going to affect Jacob for the rest of his life?
His walk.
His walk. What does this mean for us? You know what God does when he lays hold of us? He says, first of all, I'm going to knock you off of the thing that you find as your foundation. The thing where you find your stability, I'm going to knock you off of that because you're resting on that. Every time excuse me, if things are going bad, or if I don't know the answer or whatever, I'm relying on this. Sometimes we rely on our charisma. Sometimes we rely on our authority. Thank you. Sometimes we rely on our money or our power. Sometimes we go into secret places and rely on secret things to get us through.
Jacob.
What God does with Jacob is says, guess what? I'm going to knock that out from under you, right? And not only that, I'm going to change your walk forever. Everyone who sees you will see a change in your walk.
And it will appear as a weakness, right? So if you're going up to an enemy, you're not gonna, or if you're going up to somebody who's your adversary, you don't want to limp in there. You know what I mean? Like when a fighter gets into a ring, they're looking for your weakness. They're looking for a spot to hit you, and that's a spot where you're gonna have to rely heavily on God, because now everyone can see your weakness.
Yeah.
And I think God wants to touch you in a spot that's going to be impactful.
Mm.
You know, it's like it's going to impact you in a great way.
Absolutely. But before he gets that impact, the angel says, let me go because the day is dawning. What do you think? What's the significance of that? Is God going to evaporate if sunlight hits him? Is he like Vlad Dracul or what does that signify in scripture?
He didn't want to conceive God's face.
Well, he's already seen his face. Jacob says that. I've seen God face to face, right?
Let me go because the
Like,
day is
yeah, but he didn't see it like completely, because no one even, only Moses truly seen him. Well, only Moses has seen him face to face because his face was blown after that encounter. But Jacob doesn't really see God's, full face, even though he said that he met him face to face. I think when he says face to face, I think he's talking about he met him, like he encountered him, like he actually got to see, he got to physically touch him, but not actually see his actual face, because when the dawn is breaking, light is shining, and that's when you can actually, see a person's face. So I'm thinking that he didn't want Jacob to see his face because.
Any thoughts on that? Anyone? How do you feel? Did he literally see God, or
Well,
is it figurative?
I've always thought that he literally saw God, because when I think of who he's wrestling, I'm thinking the pre-incarnate Christ, not necessarily God the Father, or in the fullness of His glory, right?
Right.
So I'm thinking like, okay, the pre-incarnate Christ. Joshua encounters the angel of the Lord before he enters Jericho. He sees him. He recognizes.
So there's a lot of people who see a theophany.
Correct.
The
Yeah.
pre-incarnate Christ, the fourth man in the fire with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and things of that nature. Now, Adrian's absolutely right. God tells Moses, no one can see my face and live, but he's talking about the fullness of the Godhead and the fullness of his glory. But there are theophanies that we see throughout the Old Testament. And then, of course, everyone encounters Christ and is looking upon God and that. And I would hold that that's what Jacob, when you see it in the Hebrew, it's not figurative. He's saying, I saw the face of God. He's seeing the theophany of God. So if that's the case, why is God saying, let go of me? The sun is rising. And the key here to your symbology, he could have said anything. He could have said, let me go, the crickets are chirping. Let me go, I heard a rooster crow. Let me go, Santa Claus just shot across the sky. I don't know. He could have said anything. Why does he say, let me go, the sun is rising?
I think of like the light is breaking into the darkness. Like it's the beginning of him overcoming.
Okay, so yes. So what is a new day dawning symbolic of in Scripture?
New beginning.
It's a new beginning, right? You're spot on. That's it. So we read this a lot of times where God is like, let me go. I'm tired of wrestling with you. But he's not saying that. He's saying you're about to come into a new walk. You're coming to a new place. So let go of me. We've wrestled this out. I've changed your walk. Here's the irony of that. He doesn't. He says, I will not let you go unless you bless me. Isn't he already blessed?
Yeah.
Do you think that maybe he thinks he's not blessed?
I would assume so, yeah.
Well, he's already received the promise of God, and he didn't believe that. So really, his issue is a faith issue.
It's a faith issue. Did I really get the blessing? Look at how my life is gone. Laban's mad. Esau's probably trying to kill me here. Who am I going to turn to? I got duped for 7 years and all of this stuff's going on. Here's the kicker. And this is where it gets gooder. I won't let you go until you bless me. What does God ask him?
What's
What's
your
your
name?
name?
What is your name? Why does he ask him that?
Because he had lied to him before when he asked him.
The last time he was asked that question, who are you?
He lied about it.
He lied to his earthly father to receive the blessing.
Yeah.
Guess who you're not lying to this time, Jacob? And not only is he saying, you're going to own up to who you are, he's also saying, think of what your name is. That is your character. That is your identity. We've talked about this before. In Scripture, names are incredibly important. They speak of prophetic destiny and character. They define who the person is. They describe who the person is. But here, do you think this is what Jacob is expecting? He says, who are you? And he says, Jacob. And he says, no, you're not. Now you're Israel. Not only did he change his walk, he changed his identity. He wrestled it out of him. He said, you were right to come. You're coming and you're trying to lay hold of me because you know it's a mess. You're second guessing whether you have the blessing because you got it through deception. And you've been the victim of deception ever since. But I'm wrestling all that out of you. And a new day is dawning. And you're about to go into a new destiny. And I'm going to change your identity. And to mark that, I'm going to change your name.
That's what sanctification is for us today. in our
Speak loud.
That's what sanctification is to us today in our Christian walk. God is wrestling these things out of us, and we are transforming, and we're starting a new walk with Christ.
And when we get to heaven, we'll get a new name as well.
That's right.
Where's that at? Were you just making that up?
No, Revelation.
It's in Revelation? What's it say? I'll give you a
I
stone
Yes.
with a new name
Written on it. Yeah.
showing your true identity. And in the meantime, we're being transformed into the likeness of Christ. We talked about that a couple weeks ago, right? Psalm 17:15. I shall be satisfied when I awaken in your likeness. That's the whole point of the transformation. Think of the grace. He's saying, I want you to bless me. And the angel of the Lord is saying, oh, I'm blessing you in ways you can't imagine. Right? Patrick, if you're going to talk, they got to be able to hear you online. So talk loud.
When he changed his name, is that an act of spiritual adoption that God claimed now Israel as a spiritual son?
That's a great question. I don't know that it's spiritual adoption as much as maybe spiritual maturation, or because he already has the Abrahamic blessing. So he's already a child of Abraham. The spiritual adoption is coming in through salvation. We're not at that point now in the old covenant where it's more genealogy and lineage and the conveyance in that way. But I think it is definitely a maturation in which he's going to walk with God in a different way. So Moses before the burning bush, Moses after the burning bush, two completely different people, right? Jacob before the wrestling match, Jacob after Israel, completely different person. And we see that throughout, but we also see that factor even in the New Testament. Jesus tells one of his disciples, you are Simon, which means to hear or be heard. It's all about being heard. And he says, but you shall be Petra, a rock, or a stone, more accurately. He's changing his identity. Later on, Jacob will do this. Rachel will die giving birth to Benjamin, but she names him Ben-Oni, son of my sorrow, because she's dying in childbirth. And Jacob comes in and says, no, he shall be Benjamin, son of my right hand. He changes the kid's destiny, his character, everything by conveying that identity, identifying that and speaking that in the situation. So when we look at that, that's happening on. So I'm agreeing with your precept. I wouldn't use the term adoption because we automatically go into like what Paul is talking about, and we're adopted through salvation as children of God. But I think it is definitely a transference into a new identity, character through which God can fulfill his purposes. Right?
I think too, you almost see that transformation really pretty instantly when he goes and meets Esau, and Esau embraces him, but you see him then trying to still give away a lot of his possession. It's no longer about the things anymore. It's no longer about the possessions. And Esau's like, no, I have enough. We've actually got plenty of things. And he's like, no. And he insists that his brother, that he's able to give to his brother. His whole attitude changed. Before you see a character who's like, take. I want as much as I can get. When it comes to Laban, I want the right sheep, and I'm going to get the right ones. When it comes to, and I want the right daughter. And when it comes to my brother, I want the blessing. I want his stuff. He wants everything, and he's grabbing for it. And then he reaches this point, and God changes his walk, and he's like, oh no, I've got everything I need.
Yeah.
And it becomes outward looking, right?
Yes.
It becomes outward.
Yes.
Outward. And it's like, okay. And I think that we come to that walk in our walk where we're like,
Yes.
when we really experience God, we're like, I don't really need anything.
And you know, I think for me, the best indication of that transformation is when Jacob is dying.
Mm.
And he's addressing his 12 sons. Now remember, he had been the deceiver. He doesn't lie when he addresses his 12 sons.
He doesn't.
He calls them out for what they are, for what they've done. He affirms the good. He calls out the bad. And he goes through the first three and explains why they're not going to get the birthright. Right? But now check this out. How did Jacob get the birthright? He's not the firstborn. Esau was.
Esau surrendered it to him.
Esau surrendered how? What did Jacob do to get it?
Oh, he deceived him.
No, that's the next one.
He gave him a bowl of soup.
The bowl, he was starving, and he had the bowl of soup ready. He tricked him into giving up his birthright. And then the next thing that Jacob goes after is the Abrahamic blessing, the blessing from his father. Now that's how he deceives Abraham, putting the goat hair on, and mom's in cahoots with him and all of that. So he gets the blessing and the birthright. You know what he does with this kid? The idea of, hey, I've got everything I need. Have you ever noticed he doesn't do that with his kids? Judah doesn't get both. He doesn't get the blessing and the birthright. He only gets the blessing. Joseph gets the birthright. But because he had been in Egypt, it is given to his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. It's in your Bible. So Jacob was power hungry and was grabbing it, but he's so matured that he says, I'm not going to deposit this in one and have them all fighting. He gives some to this one, some to that one. That's a pretty big change of character. He recognizes something.
And when you talked to it earlier, you talked about there were favoritisms before, right? Well, Jacob's favorite children was Joseph and Benjamin because they came from Rachel, right? So, but it's not Benjamin who receives the blessing. It's Judah.
It's Judah.
Right? So that's
good.
who came from Leah,
Yes.
right? So,
But he recognizes that's the one. That's the one God's hand's on. And how do I know that? Because I've had God's hand on me. I know what that's like. Right? Isn't that awesome when you see it? You see the change that takes place, which is important because think about it. When we talk about that little piece of land that's roughly the size of New Jersey out in the Middle East, is it the nation of Abraham?
No.
Is it the nation of Isaac? Is it the nation of Israel?
It is.
Why would they be named after him? Because he's the one who broke it all. He broke all of the family genealogy, the generational curses, the favoritism, the deception, and all of that. He was the one who came to a point in which, by crying out to God, God wrestled it out of him, and he surrendered to God. And God forever changed his identity and walk to the point that he said, okay, that Abrahamic blessing you carry, it's going to affect all of your people after this. They are going to walk with me in a greater way as a result. That's the power of one person submitting to God.
And isn't that somewhat prophetic? Because when you read this, he says, but Israel, for you have struggled with God. The true Jews struggle with accepting Jesus as the Messiah. And then with men, everybody in the world hates Israel, but they still prevail. And then in the end, before it all, they will some of them will come to know Christ. They'll receive that. The blinders will be lifted, and they will become a new.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Well, and there's a lot of times when you talk to our Jewish brethren, they'll tell you, they still wrestle with God in that way. They see that as an ongoing, but they don't look at it in a derogatory way. They realize, God is still wrestling stuff out of us. And it's understandable that they would view that because they're still very much bound in the old covenant ways. And so it's kind of inherent to that. But isn't that beautiful that they see how that plays out?
Well, and just the wrestling in nature, wrestling is an intimate, very one-on-one. I mean, that's up close and personal. You're in each other's space. So you got to be like right in God's face. Sometimes he wants to be personal. And I think it was when he says he wrestled with him until daybreak. So it was for a season, so God's going to wrestle with us for a season, to get certain things out of us.
So what I was trying to say that I couldn't get out a few minutes ago, like Jacob's identity change, won't the nation of Israel's identity change when they come to know the truth of Christ in the end?
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I think that's a good analogy for that adoption that Patrick was talking about. I hadn't considered it in that. But yeah, they're going to wrestle with God again in that context and see Christ for who he is, according to Revelation and Paul in places in Romans and such. So yeah, that's a great analogy. Then that spiritual adoption is definitely taking place.
And we're going back next year.
We're going back next year, either January or March. We're trying to nail down some good dates. So get ready. With that said, I've totally set you up for this question. Now let's talk about you as an individual. Do you think that your wrestling matches most often are with yourself, with others, or with God?
Most often.
And let me help. The answer for most people is not God, though we'd like to say that. I think it's ourselves and others. And what do I mean by that? In the story of Jacob, you know what most of us try to do? Man, I got to deal with Laban on my back, and I got to go and face Esau. Okay, I'm going to work out a plan to deal with Esau, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do. And Jacob starts that way, but we try to work out a plan, and then we ask God to bless it, because we're telling God Esau is my problem, and what God wants to do is say, I'm not really addressing Esau with you. You are your problem, and there's something inherent to your character that I would like to remove. I would like to transform. I would like to change. So I want to talk about you. Now, if you think about it, most often when we come to converse with a ministerial counselor, or we come to the altar or a prayer team, we want to tell them about what other people are doing, right? or we ask God, fix that situation. And how often is God saying, wait till I get you alone? And then I'm going to show you what the real issue is. The real issue is not then. I want to talk about you. I want to deal with you, right? Most of our problems, we try to figure out a solution, or we avoid it, or we avoid the person. But are we as eager to talk about us with God? Thoughts?
Well, with me, I had a hard upbringing, you know, and I had some things happen in my life that hurt me today, and I'm wrestling with those all the time. And I'm continuously saying, Lord, how do I get rid of this? But my mind has kept saying it's still part of you. And I don't know what else to do. I just, you know, that's why I'm here. You know, and this is the thing that's bringing out, I mean, I have learned so much just tonight that I never would have known.
So when we have situations like that, and I've definitely walked that path, where this has happened to me, this was done to me, this was not done, which should have been done, whatever the case is, and it's malformation. It hurts. It leaves emotional wounding or spiritual wounding, sometimes physical wounding. What does the story of Jacob teach us? What do you think God's response is to those things?
Give them to me.
Okay, give them to me.
Let me wrestle it out of you.
Yeah.
You gotta.
Well, yeah, and so sometimes we want to give him the pain, and he says, give me the pain. I want to heal you of that. But where does God touch him? The area of stability. We begin to identify with those things, and we view others based on what has happened to us. Isn't that what Jacob did? He didn't trust anybody because of all the times he had been deceived. It was a way of life. So that was his worldview. That's how he viewed everyone because of what had been done to him, how it had affected him, how it formed him or deformed him in a negative way. So what is God saying? Look, I'm going to heal your pain. I'm going to heal your hurt, your broken heart, your whatever the issue is. But if you're finding your stability, your identity, your comfort, your peace in acting this way so that no one else harms you and no one else can do this, and you're always suspect and you're always angry with people in this situation, you're just going to open the wound over and over. I have to deliver you from that.
Don't you think the hip is kind of like Paul's thorn in the side?
Yeah.
A reminder?
And why would you say that, Penny? Why would you go to that?
Because it's a constant reminder that, one, you didn't change your character, God did, because he touched you. So you are always going to know that it wasn't you, which sometimes I think we get caught up in, where we have an issue and we talk to God about it and we say, you know, I really need to do better and I'm going to work on this. And now all of a sudden I'm doing better. So it's because I changed it about myself, not that God changed it. And I think sometimes that hip is kind of like Paul's thorn in the side. It's a reminder that, hey, you didn't do this. I did this. We did this together.
Yeah, but God takes a different approach with Paul, same purpose, but he changes the walk of Jacob. And with Paul, he says, I'm struggling with this, and the enemy is using it against me. Please take it away. And God says, nah, I'm going to leave it there as a reminder that I'm the one who changed it. My grace is sufficient for you. So let this be. But it's the same end goal, right? Where he's saying, you need to lean on me. And you know what Paul does? He says, okay, when I'm weak, he's strong. I'll boast in my infirmities. I'll accept it well. He lets God wrestle it out of him, transform him.
We were talking about this last night at my small group a little bit. That scripture that says, "Be still and know that I am God." This is why it's hard for us to be still with God, because we're afraid of what He's going to say to us. Because when we get quiet, we're constantly doing all the talking, kind of like a deflection mechanism that we don't even realize we're doing. Because when we get quiet, God starts speaking to us. And when God speaks to us, He doesn't want to talk about other people. He wants to talk about you. And so that's one of the reasons maybe why we have such a hard time being quiet with the Lord and getting uncomfortable in those quiet times, because God starts speaking and we are afraid of what He's going to say to us about us.
Well, you have to now come in conflict of your faith and say, okay, am I willing to hear and do what you've asked me to do,
Mm-hmm.
even if I don't like the answer?
Oh, so now there's an obligation. We have to walk it out, right?
We have to walk it out.
That's so good. And I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, plus too, if we are talking to God and we're not still, we're controlling the narrative. Therefore, we are only talking about what we want to talk
That's
about.
exactly where I was going to go, Penny. We want to tell God what is wrong, what others are doing, what is holding me back, what the situation is, and we are not hearing what God's saying in that. Why are we telling God? It's a cliche, but it's so true. Why do we keep telling God how big our problems are instead of telling our problems how big our God is?
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? Peter does the same thing even after he's restored. He did that. Jesus asked him 3 times, "Do you love me?" Then go feed my sheep, go tend my sheep. And when they're done, Jesus tells Peter, hey, Peter had said, "I'll follow you even unto death" at the Last Supper. And we know, an hour later, he's denying him 3 times. But now he's been restored. He's wrestled with God and he's prevailed.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus has restored him. And he says, "Oh, by the way, Peter, you will follow me to this. This is going to happen to you." And you know what Peter's response is? Not, "Oh, Lord, give me strength," or, "Oh, Lord, thank you for restoring me. I count it all joy." He looks over at the Apostle John and says, "What about him?"
Yep. Always want to talk about somebody else.
The whole thing that caused the problem in which Peter denies Christ and then is beautifully and wonderfully restored by Christ, Christ is bringing that to conclusion. And what's Peter's tendency? Point out someone else. Well, what about him? You know what Jesus' response is?
It doesn't matter if he lives.
What business is it of yours? If he lives till the end of time, not your issue. How about you take care of you, Peter? Isn't this how we got into this in the first place? Right? Because Peter at the Last Supper is saying, "Oh, even if all the others deny you, I will be with you." Did not know who he really was. Didn't know himself.
Mm-hmm.
That's what God's trying to speak into our lives. He's saying, "Look, I'm not going to hurt you. The change will be evident. And it might be a very intimate and uncomfortable wrestling match. But I'll get this stuff out of you that you are perpetuating and struggling with so greatly." Now, listen. Jacob's children still have issues. There is a little bit of deception. They try to cover up what they do to Joseph, but nothing to the magnitude of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You start seeing that generation. It's not passed on to his children. Nowhere near the level of what you see in Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So you see that it's not only having an effect on him, but effect on his subsequent generations. So I would invite you to consider, when I approach God, am I spending more time reminding him what happened to me as though he doesn't know? Pointing out others or situations, or am I willing to be still and let God say? Let's talk about this tendency that you have. This tendency to shut down. This tendency to have outbursts of anger. This tendency to tell people don't go there. This tendency to fall back into addictive behaviors, to numb or to overcome, this need that you have for affirmation, this need that you have to be the best or to be recognized or what. Let's talk about that, because that's what's ruining you. It's not the people who are not giving you those things. It's why you crave them. Because there's a little bit of Esau in you, and there's a little bit of Jacob in you. And I want to make you Israel, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? Anybody? Anybody online? Carolyn's wrestling with herself.
So I just wrote in my book, struggle with God or struggle with self. Choose your struggle. Like, you're going to have a struggle either way. And only one of them is going to have a positive outcome. You let God work it out of you. Because when we struggle with ourselves, we just go around the same mountain over and over and over and over. So choose your struggle, because there's going to be a struggle.
That's good. And I can tell you which one will last the shortest time. Isn't that funny? We don't want to wrestle with God because we're so afraid of the severity. So instead we continue to wrestle with ourselves and others for the duration. And then we're mad because, well, God, why aren't you fixing this? I could have done that in a night. Anybody ever gone to God in prayer and experienced a sanctification, a purging where God just did something, and I mean instantaneously? Most often sanctification is progressive. It's over time because he's using that relationally and maturing us and teaching us and building us. But there are times, I'll give you an example. I smoked for 20 some years and was convicted of it. And so I tried to quit, couldn't do it. And I went to God and said, all right, God, I don't want to do this. And it has power over me. Would you deliver me from this? And the next time I lit up a cigarette, it tasted like I licked an ashtray. It literally made me sick. It was instantaneous. And to this day, if I get around people who are smoking, I'll get a headache. God instantly delivered me from that. Now, sometimes that instantaneous might be a healing. You have a broken, and all of a sudden, that doesn't hurt anymore when you think about that. Or you find forgiveness for a person and you don't hold it against them. Or you don't speak like you used to with the language you used to. Or you don't have an angry outburst, which was your tendency. It could be any number of things. It doesn't have to be cigarettes or alcohol or something like that. But has anyone ever experienced where God has done it like that? Anybody? Few of us. That begs the question. If there are times that God does it like that, why would we wrestle with it? We don't do that in, when people want to, and I don't mean any offense on this, but when people want to lose weight, you know what they're always looking for? A pill, a shot, something that will cause the weight to go off and require little effort on their part. Instead of stepping up and saying, okay, maybe I need to change my eating habits, my exercise habits. Because we don't want to take responsibility. We always want something done really quick. We do that in our secular life, but we won't do it with God. God, I see this problem. I want you to take care of it really quick. Instead, we say, well, it's their fault. That's like, I need to lose weight, so you need to close that McDonald's. What sense does that make, right? I want to lose weight, so Papa John's got to go too, and quit putting them Swiss rolls in that food line. Well, is it really their fault?
Never.
And is it reasonable for me to demand those to be closed? And is that going to work?
We'll find something.
But don't we do that with God? We will. But don't we do that with God? God, I need you to close that person's mouth. Get them out of my life, Lord. Right? And meanwhile, God's saying, how about you go on a holy diet?
Oh, good word. Good word.
I think too, we talk about like a lot of times we talk about we're always spending time battling. Like I said, we're battling ourselves. Oh, the devil's hitting me with this and stuff. And I think it's interesting because it doesn't say wrestle the devil and he'll leave from you. It says resist the devil and he will flee from you. And we don't. In doing so, if we were just to resist the devil, just say, okay, I'm not going to spend my time wrestling this. I'm just going to pour my time into wrestling with God. God, what, and we begin to wrestle with God and let him take control, then I think that changes.
Okay, so let me put you on the spot. I 100% agree with you. But that verse you just quoted, resist the devil and he will flee. That's the second half
That
of the
is the
verse.
second half of
What's
the
the
verse.
first half?
It says
Submit
that
yourself.
submit yourself to the Lord. Yeah.
Submit yourself to God. What does Jacob do at the end of the wrestling match? He
He
submits to God.
himself, Yeah.
You see, sometimes we want to fight with God, but we're trying to prevail over God to get God to do what we want. But eventually, when we say, I surrender, wrestle out of me what you want, then we have the power to resist the enemy. Then I don't have to demand that the McDonald's close. I can stand up to the appetites of my flesh, which Esau couldn't do. And I don't have to say, well, it's your fault or your fault. I don't have to deceive things and deceive myself into believing it. I could say, all right, your word is truth, and that you'll know the truth, and the truth will make you free. The truth is I'm the one. Whether what they did may have been wrong, but I'm the one. How I'm responding is not right, and I'm not responsible for how they act, and therefore I'm not responsible to take that to God and demand that He change them. I'm responsible for how I react, right? Okay, so you can talk amongst yourselves because I forgot I brought something to share on that.
Something that you just said. So in scripture, we're supposed to resist the devil and wrestle with God. Do we not do the opposite? We wrestle with the devil and we resist God.
And then we
Ouch!
and
Wait
we
a
end up
minute.
losing,
That is
and we
what we
wonder.
do.
We end up losing to the devil because we think that
We're
what
not
we were
supposed to
supposed to
wrestle
do
him.
was wrestling him.
Yeah, we're not supposed to wrestle the devil.
And then,
Yeah.
well, when you think about the oh my goodness, the boys in Acts, right? Do they go and they
Seven
wrestle
sons of
the
Sceva?
seven? Yeah, and they go and they wrestle the demon, but they don't know God.
Yeah.
They're not in relationship with God, and they don't have the Holy Spirit. They have not wrestled with God, so they have no power or authority, right? And they get their butts kicked.
It's so true. It's a little bit painful, but it's true. Any other thoughts on that? Oh man, I just started all over on this. Come on, somebody other than these two have to have a good insight. Do I have to play spin the bottle to see who's going to speak?
So after he encounters God, he says, I've seen God face to face, yet my life has been preserved. So I think that when he's encountered God, he's revealing, when he sees himself for who he really is. It reminds me of other things when people encounter God in scripture, where they, Isaiah says,
Woe is me,
from
yeah.
man unclean lips. So now that he's encountered God, he recognizes who he is.
That's good.
And that's probably why we don't want to encounter God many times in our life.
Well, and that also begs the question, do we really fully know or better know God absent these wrestling matches? Because you're the one who said a wrestling match, very intimate, very personal, up in your face. Doesn't it help us not only know ourselves better, but know God better? So I saw this diagram talking about whether we're wrestling with others, wrestling with ourselves, or wrestling with God and letting Him address the things that are in us. And on the outer circle, it says, things I cannot control. And there is wonderful bliss and blessing and understanding. Stop wrestling. Stop fighting to control these things. Things I cannot control. Other people's thoughts. Other people's words. Other people's actions. Other people's behavior. Other people's feelings. Things I can control. My thoughts. My words. My actions. My behavior. My feelings. Don't we try to control other people's feelings. We want them to feel good about us. There's no guarantee they will. Right? And then when they take something wrong, we say, well, you shouldn't feel that way. So now we're telling them how they should feel. We're trying to control how they feel. or we're trying to control how they behave. You know, we respond harshly as a way to tell them, don't ever do this again. Don't ever behave this way with me again. But is that, sorry about that, Cat Man. He's wanting McDonald's now. See, so we can't control other people's thoughts and words and actions and behavior and feelings, but we can control our own. And you know what God wants to do? Make those righteous. But so we talked at length in a previous session series on the tabernacle model going to the temple. And after they come to the altar of sacrifice, which is a picture of sanctification, what's the next step in the tabernacle paradigm? What's the next object they come to in the outer court? The brazen laver. What's that filled with? Water. So what do they see? A reflection of themselves. Do you notice that their next step after sanctification is not a big scroll where they are to write down what everyone else is doing that's causing them problems, or how people are pushing their buttons? They're about to enter into the presence of God, and you know what he says? Better take a look at yourself. Don't be Jacob coming in here. Be Israel.
Mhm.
Wash clean right here. Let's deal with that. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
You know, whenever you were saying that, you know, when we wrestle with God, we're intimate and we are learning about him as we wrestle. It made me think of when wrestlers wrestle each other,
Are you talking wrestling or wrestling?
wrestling.
Wrestling. So, okay, like collegiate wrestling, like,
Yeah,
okay.
Like real wrestling.
Oh, that might have been recorded, and I totally, I'm waving off that when Nikita gets here. I didn't hear any of that, but go ahead. That was Penny.
But I'm saying that when they wrestle each other, they learn each other's moves and they can anticipate each other's moves. So as we wrestle with God, the more often we wrestle with him, the more we can anticipate his will and his direction
That's
for
good.
us.
That is very good. And you know, most wrestlers, I wish my son-in-law was here now, being a state champion, he could tell you this, but most, the wrestlers who are the best, their skill is to be able to feel the slightest movement and know by the tension, the muscle movement, strength, what they're about to do and be able to counter it before they're able to do it, or to move upon that moment of weakness. It is not so much about your strength, but about theirs and what they're doing and being able to feel that.
Like a discernment.
Like a discernment. Yes. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
That can apply to mixed martial arts, right? To discern the-
Yes. Same thing with mixed martial art and martial arts. A lot of the combative sports, if you look at them, they're able to move that, right? So in that situation, they're looking at others, but it's in a battle. So what they're doing in training is they're strengthening themselves. No one goes into training for a boxing match or a wrestling match or mixed martial arts and says, okay, trainer, I need you to make my opponent weaker, and I need you to shorten their reach so they can't hit me first, and I need you to make them a little slower. That's not how you train for a fight. You address your strength and inadequacies, right? That's what God's doing with Jacob. That's what we're talking about with sanctification. But you do so for the purpose of getting ready for the battle.
Leverage. Matt.
The leverage against the enemy and yourself. Where you say, nope, I see where you're going with this. I'm going to cut that off the pass.
Mhm.
Right? Instead of acting this is Galatians 5. Instead of acting in the works of flesh, I'm going to do the works of the Spirit, the fruit of the Spirit. My battle's not with flesh and blood, but principalities, power. So I'm going to put on the whole armor of God. I'm going to fight in a different way. That's what God's trying to prepare us for. But yet we're sitting here looking at the enemy and asking God, hey, I'm getting ready to go into this big match. Can you make them weaker and less good at fighting? That's not how you win a fight. Okay, any closing thoughts? Pastor Allen.
My name is Alan Barber, in case there's any, I want you to kick back.
He did not say that, Nikita.
There's that other type of wrestling, which is acting, role play. It's just the opposite of what you were talking.
Entertainment, yeah.
And that's the way.
It's pretending.
And how much of churchianity is more WWE than NCAA or Olympics? Oh my Lord in heaven, there is a sermon in that. How much of what we're doing in churches and in our own personal walk with God is more choreographed, WWE. And boy, flamboyant, and you're coming out, and I mean, how many preachers are like Macho Man and can give a great sound bite and everybody hoop up the crowd, and you know, they call it a pop when you come out and everybody's cheering. How many churches and praise teams and personal walks with God are more choreographed? And you know what the enemy loves to do? He'll choreograph it with you.
Plays the heel.
He'll play the heel. Yeah. Wrestlers do that all. They take pride in who the best heel is because their whole purpose is to sell the baby face, the face. And when they do it well, then, so a classic example of that, going to entertainment, WrestleMania 3 was in the Pontiac Silverdome, which is where the next Super Bowl champions play football. Sorry.
He's looking over.
The big match that was on all the posters and all the newsreels, Hulk Hogan was going to fight Andre the Giant, who had turned bad. And could he body slam Andre the Giant? And even in the pro circles, there was no guarantee that Andre was going to let Hulk Hogan do anything. Because, I mean, he's Andre the Giant. If he don't want to do it, he's not going to do it. So there was a lot of talk pumping up to that match. The match right before it were two wrestlers who were technical specialists. Macho Man Randy Savage, who was the Intercontinental Champion, and Ricky the Dragon Steamboat. They never practiced, but they talked on the phone. They sat down. They worked out. I think it was like 147 or 162 consecutive moves that they were going to do through that match. Perfectly. So through the whole match, they're going back and forth, and they would call each other prior to the match and be like, what's move number 57? Okay, 57, I do this. Okay, what's number 72? They're testing each other back and forth. They get into the ring. They go through the whole thing, and it's like they hit 157. They hit 158. They hit 159. They hit, there's the reversal 162, and Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, who's the good guy, pulls him over 1, 2, 3. And as they're counting 3 and the crowd is going nuts, the reigning champ who just lost his belt, Macho Man, says, though you can't hear it, but he later says this in an interview, he says, "We did it, Steamboat. We got him." He was congratulating him, saying, we just wrestled one of the best matches in history. Now he's the champion. He's losing the belt. And when he gets up, he's like, no, and he's screaming and he's yelling and all of this. But it was all choreographed. Why do I share that example? Because what we don't know is a lot of times Satan is choreographing our spiritual warfare. And he's willing to let us have a few wins to make us feel good. Because he really knows I'm the one who orchestrated this thing, and I'm still the champ. Right?
Yikes.
Wow.
What we need to do is get to a place where we submit to God and we resist the devil, and we really get in the ring. And you know who the devil doesn't want you to wrestle with in the ring? You. He says, oh, I'll lay on the mat and let you tap me out. Just don't wrestle you. Because if you wrestle you, I'm done. I'm beat.
And you know what? Those two opponents appear to be enemies, but they're really friends.
Wow.
So they appear to be enemies, but they're really friends. Undercover.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. That's the friend. And that's like when Nikita comes there, ask him about that. He was the Russian nightmare. The guys that he bloodied in the ring are his best friends. They would work out. Ask him if what I just told you is not true. How many times he did that? Beating Ric Flair beating him, going back and forth.
But how many times do we verbalize, yes, Satan is our enemy, but we live like we're a friend of his. And we battle like we're a friend of his just by
And are we oblivious to
partnering
his?
him and choreographing our.
And notice what Paul says. We are not ignorant of Satan's schemes or strategies. We need to realize he's choreographing some of this stuff, because if we can fight others, and even if we think we're fighting him, we're not fighting us.
Mhm.
Wow.
And God says that's where you're going to lose. Okay. For the record, Cat Matt, if the Lions don't pull it, I'd love to see your Eagles go there. Though I got to say, I'm just having a hard time with Washington until they get the Redskins logo back. I'm so happy to see them doing better without Dan Snyder. It's like a dream come true, but I can't bring myself to. But I might pull for them just as a way of saying, as we all should, happy birthday, Robin. Today's his birthday. So what a great birthday present it would be for him. But I would just like to note that I had a conversation with Pastor Thomas in preseason, and I said, Lions, Bills. So we'll see if that prophecy comes.
And to park a little thought in your head, somebody told me they've been granted the permission to put the Indian symbol back on.
Yes, well, they're working on that. It's just a matter of the stubborn people in the headshed. They just did a research thing and found 90% of Native Americans on the tribes not only are not opposed to the logo, they want it.
They want it, yeah.
So who are you offending, right?
They just
But,
say,
okay.
"Well, let them have Redskins."
Crystal doesn't want you to get me wound up on this issue. 'Cause I'm so mad I don't really have a hardcore team. But okay, so next week, let's read about Joseph. Let's pick up in 37, where he starts having his dreams. Joseph is the son of Jacob. And I would invite you to journey through chapter 41. This is where he's in Egypt and he's in prison and he starts interpreting Pharaoh's dreams and setting us up for that. So let's talk about, we learn a lot in the same way we learn a lot from Jacob. We can learn a whole lot from this guy named Joseph. All right. Be blessed. Stay warm. Be safe. And we'll look forward to seeing you on Sunday for another wonderful